The name Helen Duncan continues to stir debate, not only among those fascinated by the occult but also among those who believe the age of rational enlightenment should have long erased such figures from public attention. Yet her story, centered on a sensational trial, remains one of the most extraordinary chapters in 20th-century British legal history. Helen was neither a fraud easily exposed nor a prophet whose words were universally accepted. In 1944, she became the last person in Britain convicted under the Witchcraft Act, a law that seemed outdated even at the time. Was she a cunning impostor, manipulating wartime superstitions, or a medium whose abilities unnerved authorities too much to leave her be? To unravel this, we must return to the quiet Scottish suburbs where her story began. Born Helen Macfarlane on November 25, 1867, in Callander, a small town in central Scotland, she grew up in a place where life moved slowly and traditions held firm. Her father, a carpenter, earned enough to keep the family afloat, but wealth was never part of their world. Theirs was a typical working-class home of the late Victorian era, bound by strict morals, Sunday church visits, and a steady, unremarkable routine. Even as a child, Helen stood out. Her classmates nicknamed her Hellish Hell, a moniker earned through her loud, willful nature and behavior that defied norms. By her own account, around age 7, she began to see and hear the dead. She shared this with her mother, a practical woman with little tolerance for mysticism. The response was swift and stern. Helen was forbidden from speaking of it to anyone. Her mother's warning likely stemmed not from fear of the supernatural but from social risks. In a community where claims of spiritual powers could be mistaken for insanity or blasphemy, a girl with such peculiarities faced a bleak future. Despite this, Helen couldn't always suppress her outbursts. At times, she spoke of visions or messages from the other side, unsettling or even scaring those around her. This was especially problematic at her church school, where such behavior was not just strange but deemed wholly inappropriate. Over time, these episodes seemed to lessen, and on the surface, Helen's behavior aligned with expectations, at least for a while. At 16, she left home to work, like many girls of her class in post-war Scotland. Her frail health soon betrayed her. Tuberculosis forced her into a sanatorium for a lengthy recovery, an ordeal that nearly broke her. Yet in this vulnerable time, she met the man who would become her husband and the architect of her future path. Henry Duncan, a First World War veteran, was also recovering in the same facility, his health worn down by the brutal conditions of the front. Their connection started simply but grew into a profound bond, built on shared fragility, exhaustion, and perhaps the realization that second chances are rare. They later married. Life after marriage was far from easy. Henry, disabled from the war, could no longer work in his furniture workshop. Money was scarce, and with 6 children, the family's financial strain became dire. Desperate for a solution, Henry turned to the spiritualist literature gaining popularity at the time. He brought home books about the afterlife, séances, and mediums. Helen's mysterious gift, once a source of worry for her family and herself, began to seem less like an oddity and more like a potential source of income. The era played a crucial role. Britain, like much of Europe, was still grappling with the devastation of the Great War. Loss touched every family, and anyone offering a chance to reconnect with loved ones found a ready audience. Spiritualist séances surged in popularity, serving as a balm for unrelenting grief. Against this backdrop, the Duncans began hosting gatherings. At first, these were small, among friends and neighbors. But they grew, fueled by society's hunger for solace and Helen's unique abilities. Thus began the most controversial, public, and perilous chapter of her life. By the 1930s, Helen Duncan was a name known far beyond spiritualist circles. She became one of Britain's most prominent mediums, thanks to the distinctive nature of her séances. Her hallmark was the materialization of spirits, a spectacle that left audiences spellbound. A pale substance, which she called ectoplasm, would flow from her mouth, and from it, she claimed, the spirits of the dead took shape, sometimes as faces, figures, or vague humanoid forms. Unlike other mediums, who relied on cryptic voices or mysterious knocks, Helen's performances were theatrical, gripping, and highly lucrative. But these visual proofs drew fierce scrutiny and suspicion. Were audiences witnessing the afterlife or a well-orchestrated trick? Harry Price, a determined skeptic, stepped into the fray. As head of Britain's National Physical Laboratory, he was a leading debunker of spiritualist frauds. Price offered Helen a chance to prove herself through experiments overseen by independent experts. She agreed, but with conditions, notably refusing an X-ray before her séances. This refusal only deepened doubts. Critics suggested a mundane explanation. Helen swallowed fabric or gauze beforehand, dramatically producing it under dim lights to a captivated audience. In one experiment, a couple at a séance handled her ectoplasm. Analysis revealed it was made of egg white and paper, nothing otherworldly. Yet, far from diminishing her fame, these findings only amplified her allure. Each exposure seemed to make her more enigmatic, drawing larger crowds. But beyond the public fascination loomed a greater threat: the law. Britain still upheld the Witchcraft Act of 1735, a law less about witches and more about punishing those who claimed supernatural powers as frauds. This centuries-old statute, long dormant, suddenly gained relevance and would ultimately shape the fate of Britain's most famous medium. In 1934, a séance took a dramatic turn. A skeptical attendee lunged forward and grabbed the ectoplasm, revealing it to be plain white gauze. The incident sparked a scandal, cementing Helen's reputation as a polarizing figure. Yet opinions remained divided. Some swore that in other séances, a translucent, mist-like substance, not fabric, emerged, forming spirits. Others claimed their hands passed through it, finding no tangible material. Evidence of deceit clashed with tales of miracles. Regardless of what people believed, one thing was clear: the public yearned to believe. For many, her séances offered a fleeting chance to reconnect with lost loved ones, and that hope often outweighed skepticism. The legal system, however, followed a different logic. Despite no conclusive proof of fraud, Helen was sentenced to 1 month in prison. The court offered an alternative: a fine of £10,000, an enormous sum for the 1930s. She paid the fine but ignored the warnings, continuing her séances as if challenging the system was as vital as communing with spirits. The Second World War brought her work to new heights. With soldiers falling and sailors lost at sea, spiritualism flared again. Then came the moment that changed everything. In November 1941, during a séance, Helen announced that the spirit of a sailor appeared, revealing that the British battleship HMS Barham had been sunk by a German submarine, with nearly its entire crew lost. This was startling because the ship's loss was still classified, not officially confirmed until months later. Her claim caused alarm and raised questions. How could she know secret information? Authorities saw two possibilities. Either she had an inside source in intelligence, or, more gravely, she was aiding the enemy. The treason angle gained traction, transforming her from a questionable medium into a perceived threat to national security. Skeptics offered a simpler theory. Henry, a war veteran, might have picked up rumors from comrades or grieving families. But in wartime, any unverified information was dangerous, and its sources had to be contained. The authorities' scrutiny grew relentless. Her séances raised fears about what other secrets she might reveal, potentially compromising classified military operations. In January 1944, Helen was arrested during a séance. Charging her as a medium was impossible. Spiritualism was legal, with no direct ban on séances. But the 18th century Witchcraft Act provided grounds, equating claims of supernatural powers with fraud. Under this law, she was sentenced to 9 months in prison. Remarkably, Winston Churchill himself came to her defense, advocating for the repeal of the archaic law. Rumors even circulated that the Prime Minister attended séances, adding a layer of intrigue to the case. Supporters highlighted that Helen was the sole breadwinner for her 6 children and disabled husband, bearing the weight of their livelihood. Yet the conviction stood firm. After her release, Helen swore to abandon séances. For a time, she kept her promise. But by November 1956, she resumed, only to face another police raid. Officers attempted to seize her ectoplasm, but it seemed to dissolve before their eyes. She was arrested again, but the charges didn't hold, and she was released, leaving the final chapter of her story unresolved. After this last arrest, Helen's health crumbled. 5 weeks later, she died. The cause remains a matter of speculation. Believers in the paranormal argue that forcibly interrupting her trance weakened her fatally. A doctor noted burns on her abdomen, which some link to the return of ectoplasm, a process said to cause severe harm. More practical observers point to her lifelong poor health, worsened by swallowing fabrics for her performances, making her death unsurprising. Whatever the truth, Helen Duncan's story provokes reflection. How could a society proud of its progress judge someone's fate using centuries-old witchcraft laws? The law that condemned her was repealed in 1951, thanks in part to figures like Churchill, who was no stranger to spiritualism. Her case stands as a reminder of the thin line between fear and faith, law and justice, and how long humanity holds on to old prejudices. One final question: do you believe in mediums? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. If this story captivated you, give it a like and subscribe for more tales of mystery and history.